This program contains graphic material, including offensive language. Viewer discretion is advised. A massive bomb explodes in the midst of a city. A message from the vicious motorcycle gang, the Outlaws.
It was a methodical campaign against the people they thought had come into their territory.
Bikers driven by greed.
The bottom line for these guys are, how much money can we put into our pockets?
Who will stop at nothing to protect their interests.
They started seeing other bike gangs as enemies to be disposed of.
The drugs.
There is something dirty, something dark going on behind the scenes.
The women.
Gang rapes are very common.
The brutality.
They put the shotguns to the back of their heads and they blew their brains out.
We go deep inside the world of the Outlaws, where protecting turf means rivals die.
They started telling us, check your cars for bombs.
And the lust for vengeance leaves a trail of terror.
They did whatever they pleased, and they were completely out of control.
The outlaw motto is God forgives, outlaws don't. And I think for the most part that's self-explanatory.
Chicago, November 7th, 1994. A massive explosion rocked the city's west side, engulfing a nondescript building on Grand Avenue.
It was the third largest car bomb in the United States. It was the first World Trade, Oklahoma City, and Clubhouse on Grand Avenue.
100 pounds of C4 explosive, the equivalent of 134 sticks of dynamite, were packed in a stolen sedan and detonated on a busy city street during rush hour. The target was the clubhouse of the Hell's Henchmen, a local Midwestern biker club.
It just looked like a war zone. There was just flaming parts all over the place.
Flames shot up 3 stories and the car was destroyed, its engine thrown halfway down the block. It was only by miracle that no one was killed or maimed. To law enforcement, there's little question about who was behind the blast. It bears all the marks of the region's dominant motorcycle gang, the Outlaws.
Bombs are kind of the outlaw signature. That's what they've been known to do in the past, and that's definitely what they were doing at that time.
The Outlaws were in an escalating and bloody turf war with their mortal enemies, the infamous Hell's Angels. And the Hell's Henchmen were caught in the middle. The Angels were merging with the Henchmen to get a stronghold in the Midwest, a region long considered outlaw territory. But not if the Outlaws could stop it. The Outlaws say they are all about biking and brotherhood. The club is simply an opportunity to party and ride motorcycles with like-minded rebels and to exist outside the norms of society. Authorities don't buy it. Law enforcement calls the Outlaws a ruthless and organized worldwide criminal syndicate with 3 goals: money, power, and turf.
They came from motorcyclists and evolved into criminal organizations. It's not because they love each other as brothers. It's not the fact that they may or may not enjoy riding motorcycles. The bottom line for these guys are, how much money can we put into our pockets?
Like the Hells Angels, Banditos, and Pagans, the Outlaws are one of the 4 major motorcycle clubs known as 1%ers.
They're basically the 1% of the motorcycle community who operates outside the law.
It's a badge of honor the Outlaws display with pride.
That the 1% patch is probably the most coveted patch. It's the patch that signifies and tells the world, I am the bad of the baddest. I am the top dog of the motorcycle club world.
For some outlaws, that means trafficking narcotics and women, running prostitution rings, dealing weapons and stolen goods, and protecting those interests at all costs.
It's all about the turf. If I'm claiming Illinois as my state, everything that goes on in that state belongs to me. That could be drug distribution, that could be prostitution, it could be motorcycle theft. So when another rival gang comes into that area, they're infringing upon that.
For over 3 decades, the Outlaws were the dominant 1% club in the Midwest, while the Angels ran the Northeast and West Coast. But greed had blurred the boundaries of traditional turf. Both clubs were expanding, and in the Hell's Henchmen, the Angels saw a golden opportunity.
The Angels weren't that strong in the Midwest, and they were looking to expand. Being able to roll 3 chapters, one in Indiana, one in Chicago, one in Rockford, was very appealing.
This would have given the Angels 3 clubs within driving distance of Chicago, and it drove the Outlaws crazy.
For the Outlaws, hatred toward the Angels is embedded deep in their culture and worn on their sleeve. A favorite Outlaw slogan displayed on tattoos and t-shirts is "Adios."
That is a very strong statement as to how they view the Hells Angels and how they plan to deal with the Hells Angels when they see them in areas that they deem theirs.
In the months before the Chicago bombing, the Outlaws proved they took that slogan very seriously. On New Year's Eve, 1993, Outlaw International President Harold Taco Bowman declared war on the Angels and their sympathizers during a club party in Fort Lauderdale.
He told them they need to be rottener than they had been, and they need to get back to being what real outlaws were, and they were going to start pressing all the groups that were associated with the Hells Angels.
Bowman, who often wore a long black cape with a swastika, was the highest-ranking person in the outlaw hierarchy.
Bowman made the decision that they were going to go after the Hells Angels. Whenever you have any person that's the top of some violent group that directs other people to do it, they go out and do it.
Over the next year, the Outlaws would answer Bowman's battle call. ATF Special Agent Chris was undercover with the Hells Henchmen in Rockford, Illinois during their 1994 merger with the Angels. He recalls a warning issued by Henchman Chapter President Monty Mathias, who helped arrange the merger.
It was just standard operating procedure to be on the lookout for the Outlaws. Monty even said at one point it was going to be a long summer because the Outlaws are out there and they're looking to get us.
For Monty Mathias, that summer turned out to be not very long at all. On June 27, 1994, Wisconsin State Line Outlaw Chapter President Kevin "Spike" O'Neill deployed outlaw wannabe David Wolf and 2 others to Mathias's Rockford motorcycle shop. For Wolf, it was an opportunity to prove that he was worthy to officially join outlaw ranks.
Wolf went in and bought some spark plugs and checked out the store. Came out and told the other 2 that it appeared Mathias was alone, took his .45 and went back into the shop.
Wolf fired 3 shots into Mathias's shoulder, head, and neck, and then finished him off with repeated stabs with a screwdriver. Mortal blows that the coroner later dubbed frenzy wounds. A blood-soaked Wolf emerged from the shop. The team then called Spike O'Neill with an update delivered in code.
They said that head gasket you wanted us to look at, well, it's taken care of. Last time we saw it, it was leaking all over the floor.
For his loyalty, Wolf was anointed part of the Outlaw Brotherhood and given his club colors. The Outlaws were waging full-out war on any club that supported the Angels, and the Hells Henchmen were feeling the heat.
He started telling us, check your cars for bombs every time you come out of the store, at your house, at the clubhouse. Be armed at all times.
They had every reason to worry. In October 1994, Hells Henchmen Chapter President Roger Feebrantz's truck exploded as he put it into gear. Someone had rigged explosives to the vehicle's transmission. Feebrantz barely survived the blast. 6 years later in court, his wife detailed the aftermath.
She said, I heard the explosion. I ran out and the backs of my husband's legs were gone. Veins were pumping blood out. I stuffed a towel into it. We got into the ambulance. He died 2 or 3 times on the way to the hospital.
The attacks on Matthias and Fiebrance were done in typical outlaw fashion, deliberately and brutally, but privately.
Bikers are a lot more underground than street gangs are. Bikers conduct their business privately, as secretly as they can, and they try to avoid getting into situations that is going to bring, a negative public eye onto them.
But that was all about to change. 3 weeks later, the outlaws detonated the massive car bomb at the Hell's Henchmen clubhouse in the midst of a busy Chicago neighborhood during rush hour. A bloody war that once raged underground spilled out into city streets and public view. Though there were no casualties, the damage could have been catastrophic. That seeming lack of regard for human life was a hallmark of a gang with a long history of doing whatever it took to protect their interests.
Those guys were so out of control. I mean, it was not unlike them to go into a bar and take it over, and if someone gave them, any lip, I mean, they'd beat the hell out of the guy.
Chicago, 1994. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club was waging a bloody turf war over the Midwest against arch rivals, the Hells Angels. On December 2nd, the Angels officially moved into Chicago when the Hells Henchmen replaced their club patches with the Angels' infamous Death's Head logo. The Outlaws were infuriated that the Angels had moved on a territory the Outlaws believed belonged to them. On March 3rd, 1995, Jack Castle, a newly patched member of the Hells Angels, was driving to work after meeting a friend for coffee. It was like any other day, until a hail of bullets stopped him dead. It was a carefully planned and brutally executed assassination.
They staked him out, they knew his pattern, they knew where he stopped for coffee, and when Jack Castle pulled up, they just pulled up next to him and shot him, just about blew his head off.
Castle's body had 11 entry wounds, but no exit wounds. Most of his face was gone. His Hells Angels t-shirt soaked in blood. His jawbone lay on a nearby sidewalk. Castle's murder came on the heels of 4 other killings and 6 bombings. Among them, the massive 1994 car bomb that ravaged a Chicago city block. Leading the Outlaws to war was International President Harold Taco Bowman.
Taco Bowman is pretty flamboyant there. He's like a showboat. And of course he attracts attention, but he's got a huge, huge ego, and egos cause problems.
After becoming an outlaw, Bowman rose steadily through the ranks. In 1984, he was elected to the club's highest post. On the surface, Bowman hardly lived the life of a gangster. He had a house in an upscale Michigan neighborhood, sent his kids to private schools, and except for driving around in an armor-plated Cadillac, tried to pass himself off as a typical suburbanite.
This guy's wealth was estimated into the millions. It's the money, and obviously the prestige that goes along with being the top outlaw.
But behind the facade, Bowman's hands were drenched in blood. The outlaw assassins attacking the Angels were soldiers answering Bowman's call to battle.
You have the charismatic leader of a large organization that has some very violent tendencies. Bowman was the guy that just with a few words was able to direct all the stuff, cause it to happen.
Tension with the Hells Angels had reached a boiling point, but it had been building since the very birth of the Outlaws decades earlier. In their own folklore, the Outlaws date themselves back to 1935, when the McCook Outlaws were said to have formed along Old Route 66 in McCook, Illinois. However, most authorities agree that the Outlaws were created in Chicago in the 1950s, part of a new generation of motorcycle gangs that evolved following World War II.
Men go off to war. They experience the ferocity, the horror, the hell that is war. And something changes in them. You don't miss the war, obviously, but there's not a lot of excitement going to work, wearing a tie, turning a wrench, or swinging a hammer.
The thrill of riding motorcycles gave these young veterans some of the action they longed for. And Harleys, made in America, became the bike of choice.
They're large, imposing beasts, and they're kind of raucous. When you take the mufflers or the silencers off of them, they can be downright obnoxious.
What began as little more than alcohol-soaked debauchery soon took a sinister turn.
So they started buying these motorcycles and forming little gangs, and then they could terrorize the countryside.
Motorcycle gangs fought to control territory, and the Chicago Outlaws led the charge. By the 1960s, the Outlaws had become larger and more organized than other Midwestern clubs. Making it clear they chose to live outside the rules of the normal world, they adopted a menacing logo, the Skull and Pistons, they nicknamed Charlie. With Charlie emblazed on their backs, the Outlaws grew bolder and their activities more deviant. In the 1960s, the Outlaws spread throughout the Midwest and moved eastward, merging with another motorcycle club in Florida to become the American Outlaws Association. But it was Vietnam that laid the foundation for what motorcycle gangs would become. The conflict brought an explosion in membership. Some disillusioned veterans saw an opportunity to belong and embrace the rebellious lifestyle on the fringes of society.
So folks come back from Vietnam. They need a place to go where they can be with people like them. Motorcycle clubs were one place where they could go. They didn't have to explain why they were the way they were. They could just be.
Perhaps more importantly, the counterculture of the Vietnam era also brought a deluge of drugs. Doing them and dealing them turned into an outlaw way of life.
The bikers were the very first to understand that they could make a lot of money selling drugs. They got into it right away. They bought out the chemists. They set up professional labs.
Drug trafficking and distribution would develop into many outlaws' main source of income. Prostitution was not far behind. Of the big 1% gangs, the Outlaws are the most likely to pimp their women. And for the past several decades, women have fallen prey to countless abuses at their hands.
The Outlaws consider women an object to be used to make money. I mean, she might be the guy's girlfriend, she might be his wife, but he's making her do 10, 20, 30 guys a night because it provides income for him.
The old ladies make the money that is in turn spent on dope, which is turned back into more money. If you took away all the old ladies, they'd be in trouble because I don't think one of them knows how to work.
Many young girls were not turning tricks by choice. They were prisoners who'd been kidnapped by the Outlaws.
They will abduct and they will rape them and teach them how to be prostitutes and put them out to work because the Outlaws are notoriously powerful in the white slave trade.
There's a lot of young girls who die, and the ones that don't die are burned out. When you're no good anymore.
As the Outlaws' illicit businesses grew, so did the club's increasing desire to protect the turf they deemed their own. Traditionally, the major 1% clubs, including the Outlaws and the Hells Angels, each had rigid and defined geographic regions. For the most part, they respected each other's space.
They realized that, okay, the Hells Angels will have West Coast, the Outlaws will have Middle America and Florida, and we're largely at peace. And they have a whole etiquette that goes with the territory.
But by the 70s, a lust for power and money was tempting the clubs beyond their time-honored borders and into enemy territory.
When these guys got into drugs and became heavy-duty criminals and businessmen in the underworld, they looked at each other differently. They looked at each other as competitors.
The war between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels unofficially began in 1974 when three Angels traveled to Florida. There, they encountered members of the Outlaws Fort Lauderdale chapter who had just learned that another outlaw had been beaten by an angel. The Outlaws feigned nice and invited the Angels to their clubhouse for a beer.
At one point, one of the Outlaws got up and said, "You know what? We don't drink beer with bastards like you." And they pulled out their guns, and they loaded them up into a van. They tied their hands and feet with pink clothesline, and they drove them out to a rock pit. and they put the shotguns to the back of their heads and they blew their brains out over the rock pit.
Between 1974 and 1984, the Outlaws were implicated in 80 deaths in the state of Florida alone, leaving a trail of blood behind them. Outlaws spread into new states, North Carolina and Georgia, Michigan and Oklahoma. In 1977, the Outlaws expanded their enterprises north of the border, beating the Hells Angels into Canada. There, the Outlaws grabbed a foothold on the Canadian drug market, manufacturing and trafficking Valium and methamphetamines. But the Hells Angels were hot on their hogs, and Canadian soil became a battleground.
All of a sudden, people are using anti-tank rockets, they're using grenades, they're using RPGs, they're using, some people had flamethrowers.
Throughout the 80s and 90s, hundreds died in the Canada biker wars. The Canadian conflict was a harbinger of future strife to come.
And they just said, showtime. And they grabbed whoever was available, started cutting them with knives, firing their guns.
People were so terrified they were literally throwing their kids under cars so they wouldn't be hit by stray bullets.
By the end of the brawl, one angel lay bleeding to death from knife wounds, and an outlaw lay shot and lifeless in the pit. At least 4 other gang members were injured.
This was just a sheer act of macho idiot terror.
That terror would continue. Days later, Outlaws International President Taco Bowman learned that a member of another motorcycle club had hugged a Hells Angel at the funeral of their fallen comrade. Outraged, Bowman ordered the Orlando, Florida chapter to retaliate.
Outlaws were told by Bowman, you're going to wipe them out, and they proceeded to beat the people to a pulp. That's Bowman. That's a consequence of somebody hugging a member of the Hells Angels 2,000 miles away.
That kind of brutality belies the public image that the Outlaws work hard to portray. That they are simply rebels who refuse to conform. They argue that though they may not live by the rules of society, the club does live by society's laws, and Outlaws past and present insist that they are not a gang.
It's clear as day, MC means motorcycle club. It's on your back, motorcycle club. MC, but it's not a gang, it's a club.
But according to the government, the American Outlaws Association is a 1,500-member criminal corporation with members as far-flung as Eastern Europe and Australia. While each of the club's nearly 200 chapters operates independently in its own territory, all answer to regional and national leaders who control the drug trade and the flow of money throughout the organization.
They are organized crime. They have a structure involved. They have a president, a vice president. You have to answer up through a chain of command. You've got foot soldiers.
Each chapter itself has a strict structure and hierarchy.
They keep a pretty tight rein on their membership, making sure that they don't get people that they would deem as undesirable.
Suspicious of everyone, the Outlaws put prospective members through a long and complex test period. It's a trial undercover agent Fingers experienced firsthand when he investigated the Outlaws Joliet, Illinois chapter.
You're basically the slave of the club at that point in time. You're going to do bar detail. You're going to clean up after the parties. You're going to stand security and watch bikes outside during the parties. And of course, you're going to be a constant lookout.
To be eligible, a prospect must be white, male, and own an American-made motorcycle with a minimum engine power of 1,000 cc's. The ultimate goal of a prospect, the privilege to wear every outlaw's most prized possession, their colors.
You earn those colors and you love those colors. You shouldn't lose your colors. This is one thing you don't want to do is lose your colors.
The Outlaws patch depicts the club insignia, the infamous skull and pistons.
It's kind of a takeoff of the Jolly Roger, of the pirate's flag, where you have a skull and crossbones. But instead of the skull and crossbones, you've got a skull and crossed pistons.
Only full members are allowed to don the patch, not prospects, and certainly not women. Women have little stature in the Outlaws world. and the clubhouses are known as breeding grounds for misogyny and abuse.
They would hire strippers / prostitutes to come in. I think once you're in that environment and the door locks behind you and you got 30 or 40 outlaws in there, they're going to have their way.
Women are expendable. They don't look at them as anything other than property, so they don't really worry about how they're treated.
Wives and girlfriends of members called old ladies wear their own patch, property of the outlaws.
It's no different than a car or a motorcycle. They own you. And in some cases, the gang owns the female, which is even a worse situation.
But some old ladies defend the patch and say its true meaning is misunderstood.
As stating a member says, hey, this is my old lady, and he's proud of her and wants the world to know that. You're not degraded in any way. You're not passed around between members. You know, it's the highest level of respect, truly.
Not all old ladies are so lucky. Many have been beaten for infractions such as poor housekeeping, disrespecting the club, and moving a member's vest without permission. Few ever report such crimes. For patched members, wearing the outlaw colors mandates complete loyalty to the club over all else.
One of the rules within the outlaws is your brother may not always be right, but he will always be your brother. So no matter if he's out doing something wrong or bad or criminal or stupid, you have to support him in whatever endeavor it is that he's trying to accomplish.
Failure to do so can mean losing your colors, and sometimes worse. That's a lesson ex-outlaw Ani learned when he was forced to choose between the club brotherhood and his own blood. He defended his eldest son, a chapter vice president, in a fistfight against a higher-up. That was considered unforgivable.
I was thrown out of the outlaws for a reason of protecting my son, you know. But he got jumped on by our higher captain or president. Basically, f this guy. You know, brothers don't jump on brothers. And that's when my heart was broken. My kid's heart was broken.
Ani managed to keep his colors and tattoos, a privilege not often granted to those kicked out of the club. According to the Outlaw Constitution, a member can get a club tattoo 1 year after receiving his patch. Most commonly inked are the outlaw logos and slogans. OFFO, Outlaws Forever, Forever Outlaws. And GFOD, God forgives, outlaws don't. Some are more specific, like the SS symbol of the Nazi death squad.
The outlaws, in particular, like some of these insignia, and they were worn as tattoos or as emblems on their vests by people who killed for the organization.
Nazi symbols, intended to intimidate and disturb civilians, became a club fixture for nearly 50 years. Even their club shoulder patch featured a prominent swastika. But as outlaws were arrested and began to go to trial, they learned that wearing such outrageous insignia came with an unexpected price.
A swastika on your vest. What are the outlaws going to say? What's their excuse? What legitimate excuse are they going to come up with for it being on their vest? So at one point, they were told to take them off.
In 2000, the swastika on the club patch was quietly removed. But the outlaws continue to brand themselves with their distinct club tattoos for identification and intimidation.
I think most of them will tell you it's better to be feared than respected. It was explained to me, if we sense any fear, we will act like a pack of piranhas.
These guys have a gangster thug mentality, and they display that through their body art. You know, something common you'll see with the outlaws. Snitches are a dying breed. They'll tattoo this on their body. They're sending a message.
And the outlaws are not afraid to use violence to set an example, even against their own. In January 1995, police found the body of Indiana outlaw Donald Fogg laying face down in the snow near the gang's Gary clubhouse. He had been shot 3 times in the head. The Hells Angels were logical suspects, But Fogg's corpse was actual proof that the outlaws lived by their slogan, God forgives, outlaws don't.
The outlaws went through the motions for Fogg. They had a funeral, they had the cavalcade, but turns out that they killed him. They eliminated him because they thought he had become a snitch.
Worried that Fogg might reveal details of the Lancaster Speedway murders, outlaw President Taco Bowman personally ordered the hit. At the height of the turf war with the Hells Angels, they couldn't afford anyone spilling their secrets. Little did the outlaws know that Fogg's murder would add fuel to a growing fire that the feds were stoking. The government's approach to violent crime would strike at the very heart of the outlaws' organization.
You murder people and you go into bars and beat everybody up, no, you're going to get law enforcement's interest.
In November of 1994, 2 weeks after the Chicago blast, the ATF sent a warning to all federal, state, and local authorities. The outlaws and the Angels were in an escalating and violent war. Molotov cocktails had been thrown onto porches. Fire extinguishers rigged with explosives left on doorsteps.
They're crawling up under guys' cars at night, putting an IED underneath there, and fusing it, getting it ready to go.
This was a group devoted to hideous crime, and they took pride in their actions.
But that was all about to change. The crime spree coincided with a government crackdown on gang violence in America. In 1996, the U.S. Justice Department listed the outlaws among the 15 most dangerous crime cartels in the country. A key tool in attacking these syndicates, the racketeering statute, known as RICO. RICO was designed to take down criminal enterprises like the mob. As the government saw it, the outlaws were no exception.
We view them as organized crime, plain and simple. People getting involved in an organization like this is just a vehicle for them to further their criminal careers.
Instead of prosecuting individuals for separate crimes, RICO allowed authorities to establish connections that painted a picture of the organization as a whole and imposed severe sentences for all involved. By the summer of 1995, the outlaws in the Midwest were feeling the heat. They knew they had a lot of enemies who would revel in their incarceration. At the top of that list, the Hells Angels.
The outlaws got scared. They were afraid that the Hells Angels were going to testify against them. And because of that, they said, okay, if we keep going like this, we're all going to end up in jail.
Ironically, the government's scrutiny would eventually force a tenuous truce between the outlaws and the Hells Angels. But the uneasy peace couldn't turn back the clock. At least 5 were dead as a result of the turf war, and a time of reckoning was upon them. It wasn't a rival gang member who would do the outlaws in. It was a woman. Patricia Wolf, who's now deep in witness protection, was tired of her outlaw husband's womanizing, and she knew a lot. David Wolf had bragged to her about stabbing Hell's henchman Monty Mathias to death with a screwdriver, among other sins committed during the Range War.
It seems as though David Wolf couldn't have sex without talking, either as foreplay or afterplay. He would come home from a killing and tell Patricia the details.
Patricia let the feds bug her phone and put a wiretapped lamp in her living room. Then came an unexpected bonus. When Wisconsin State Line Chapter President Spike O'Neill, who had ordered the Mathias hit, stopped by.
Spike O'Neill was visiting, and he said, "That's a nice lamp." And Patricia said, "I'll get you one." And so Spike bugged himself.
For several months, the feds recorded outlaws discussing their dirty deeds.
They discussed the finer points of law. If you're going to kneecap someone, will you get a longer sentence if you hit them with a lead pipe or if you put a bullet through their knee? What if you cut off his head and you're caught with the guy's head in your trunk?
They also talked about explosives.
You hear the outlaws sitting there, they're watching TV and they see the Oklahoma City bombing, and they're saying, we got to get bombs like that.
In June of 1997, 17 outlaws were indicted in Milwaukee. Among the crimes cited, the Chicago car bomb, the murder of Hell's henchman Monty Mathias, the Lancaster Speedway riot that killed 2 people, and the truck bomb that nearly killed henchman Roger Febrantz. Prosecutors organized the efforts of 25 law enforcement agencies and presented 30,000 pages of documents, mountains of tapes and evidence, and over 100 witnesses to build a damning case against the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. When the trials were over, 16 had been found guilty. Meanwhile, as their brothers fell around them, many outlaws started looking out for themselves.
Every organization has somebody that can be turned. You make a choice, the patch or prison. And a lot of guys are gonna, choose giving up the patch.
Around the country, outlaws at all levels of the club were feeling the heat. In 1997, International President Harold Taco Bowman was indicted in Florida, charged with conspiracy to commit crimes against the Angels, drug trafficking, and the murder of one of their own, the supposed snitch, Donald Fogg. But before the feds could arrest him, Bowman vanished. For over a year, he sat on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Finally apprehended in 1999, Bowman was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison. New leadership took hold, but the Outlaws had taken a hit. For a while, membership in the Midwest dwindled.
Basically, through the efforts of law enforcement and the RICO Act, they're running scared.
During the relative quiet, the Outlaws would regroup and reignite, becoming more sophisticated and perhaps more dangerous than ever before. They developed a new strategy.
Don't start a war, don't go shoot someone, don't go bomb someone's clubhouse. Walk in with a big bucket of cash and give it to someone and buy them.
The 1990s turf war waged by the Outlaws Motorcycle Club against the Hells Angels and their supporters left a trail of biker bodies strewn throughout the Midwest. But a government crackdown had forced a peace between the rival motorcycle clubs. In the lull, the Angels were able to establish a presence in the Chicago suburbs without further fight from the Outlaws.
The truce was a direct result of those RICOs. That stopped the bombings, it stopped a lot of the overt violence, stopped right at that particular moment in time. So it did have an effect on these guys to a degree.
In the wake of the prosecutions, the Outlaws changed their approach and their public face.
I think they are getting more into the public relation type arena. They started to see that, we need to turn this around and, get more people on our side.
Outlaws now regularly participate in toy drives and charity events.
They take the biggest, baddest, ugliest looking biker and put him on the raunchiest looking Harley, and then they stuff it with teddy bears. And people look at that and say, oh, look at that big biker, he's such a nice guy.
They're putting on a happy face with the kids and wearing the Santa hat, and then they're walking out the back door flipping the police off and being as obscene, showing their true colors, who they really are to us. They see it as a game, it's a joke.
In the past several years, law enforcement says a new generation of outlaws has emerged.
These younger members, they're not dedicated to the lifestyle. It's about money and it's about recognition. All they're seeing is what's in front of them. They've got the patch, they've got instant access to drugs, money, women, and they're looking at it for what perks are involved.
They're also gaining momentum in new places. Since 1998, the Outlaws have grown to nearly 200 chapters around the world, adding members in 16 countries, including Russia, Norway, and Japan.
They're in Australia, they're in throughout Europe, they're in Central and South America, they're in Asia. They're all over the place. The larger they grow, the bigger their empire grows and the bigger their reputation grows.
In 2005, hundreds of outlaws from 8 countries and 16 U.S. states descended on Chicago for the Outlaws' grand 70th anniversary celebration. It was a public display of the club's solidarity and strength. The Outlaws have grown to more than 1,500 members worldwide, and every added chapter means more money for the organization.
Bikers are businessmen, and they treat each chapter like a franchise. So when the Outlaws want to expand, they'll go into an area where there's an existing bike gang, and they'll say, you know, we like you guys, you know, we'd like to give you a business plan, we'll show you how to kill people, we'll show you how to organize your finances.
The Outlaws may also have discovered that dead bodies are bad for business.
They're learning that the best way to do business is to do it peacefully. Don't go bomb someone's clubhouse. Walk in with a big bucket of cash and give it to someone and buy them.
That may make the Outlaws more dangerous than ever.
Bikers have accumulated a lot of wealth, a lot of power. They are, as a form of organized crime, in a position now to seriously threaten national security. They have the wealth to buy judges, cops, politicians.
They pump the cops. You got a police officer that can tell you stuff. They will tell you pretty much anything. Oh, you didn't hear from me, but here's what's going on. Everybody's got a secret. And they would use that to their advantage constantly. They got great intelligence information from police officers.
The truce with the Angels has already ended, and violence is beginning again. In 2006, 5 outlaws were shot near the grounds of the annual Sturgis motorcycle rally in South Dakota. 2 Hells Angels were arrested for the crime. That same year, a Hells Angel was shot from his bike and killed in Connecticut. No one was arrested, but outlaws were suspected. The Outlaws are also expanding into new criminal ventures, like computer hacking and identity theft. The feds are still fighting back. In 2007, after a 5-year investigation, 16 outlaws were indicted in Detroit. Among the charges, drug distribution and assault with dangerous weapons. Bringing down the outlaws is an uphill battle.
Their ruthlessness and their willingness to expand, their willingness to fight their rivals, and just to be violent is what's allowed them to flourish.
Some worry the chance to stop the outlaws may have passed long ago.
The problem just festered and grew and festered and grew. There's a very small window of opportunity when a gang forms when you can destroy it. And if you don't destroy it at birth, it's like a cancer. It will grow, it will spread, and you will never ever get rid of it. And you will spend generations fighting it.